And the last question this week comes from Todd Marsh. And Todd says, "Hey, Brian, I have a question for your podcast. I know you enjoy the new canon quite a bit. What is the biggest drawback, in your opinion, of a connected universe? Would love to hear your thoughts." Thanks for the question, Todd. And there are, I do enjoy the new canon quite a bit. There are some stinkers that I really don't care about. Heir to the Jedi, I don't even like saying the name of that book on this channel. The first Aftermath is a little rocky for me. Last Shot was really bad in my opinion. Most Wanted was bad in my opinion. But for the most part, it's been pretty good. As Han would say, it's pretty good. But there are some drawbacks to having a largely connected universe. Because no matter, I don't care who you are. If you try to tell me the EU was canon, George Lucas didn't even consider it canon. Because if he did, the Clone Wars in episodes 2 and 3 would have been vastly different. They would have been based on the Clone Wars from the Thrawn trilogy. So the EU was never canon, as far as George Lucas was considered. I never thought of it as canon. They were good stories to read. They were fun to read. But now we have this connected universe where everything blends into each other. And I'll give you some good examples real quick before I talk about the drawback. I just finished A Crash of Fate, which happens on Black Spire Outpost. Black Spire happens about the same time. The novel Black Spire is happening about the same time at the same outpost. So there are things that happen in A Crash of Fate that are already being set up to happen in Black Spire. So there's certain things, certain mentions happening here and there. Oh, this complements that and this complements that. So it's kind of nice where everything kind of flows together. Yes, there are some contradictions, but it's one of those from a certain point of view things, right? I've always hated that. But anyway, some of the drawbacks to having a connected universe where all the novels connect and everything like that is sometimes, not always, but sometimes you have to read something in a book to know what the hell is going on in a movie. And I'll give you an example. And this isn't really a great example, but it's as close as I can get. Rogue One. When Rogue One came out, it had no opening crawl at the beginning of it. Me, having the YouTube channel, had read Catalyst. I had read that book all the way up to the release of Rogue One, so I knew Galen Erso. I knew Lyra Erso. I knew Director Krennic. I knew who that was. I was there for the birth of Jyn Erso. I was there with Saw Gerrera, meeting the Ersos for the first, and all this other stuff. I knew the characters. I knew the backstory there. So that when you open up Rogue One and Krennic says, we were this close to having peace and prosperity through the galaxy, and Galen says, I think you're confusing peace with terror. I knew what they were talking about. People who had never read the book maybe were a little lost in the sauce. And that's that's really the best example I can think of where you had to have read something in a book to know what was going on in Rogue One. Now, I've talked to people who had never read the book and saw Rogue One, got it, no problem. But reading the books enhanced the movie, right? Another drawback, and this is kind of a big one that I've noticed lately, and it's kind of been hitting a little harder, and I'm starting to get, I don't want to say, I was talking about the Black Spire fatigue a while ago. That's starting to set in. I don't want to say this kind of fatigue is setting in yet, but I'm worried that it is. When you had the EU, most of the stories were shaped around the Skywalkers or their kids. It was either Han, Luke, and Leia, Lando, droids, Chewie, or it was, Jaina and Jason and Anakin Solo and those stories and the New Jedi Order and all that stuff. And Mara Jade, right? All those other characters. But it was centered around the Skywalkers. This new canon is not centered around one particular family. This new canon, and maybe this is Disney shooting themselves in the foot. I don't know. We always talk about how we want new characters, new stories, build on the galaxy. And I've said it on this channel several times. There's trillions of people out there in the galaxy. Why don't we tell some of their stories? The further we get into this new canon, the more I'm starting to realize, and you may disagree with me, that's cool. And let me know in the comments why you disagree with me. I want to hear your thoughts. I'm not saying you're stupid or anything. We can disagree respectfully. I truly believe that when you have a book like, it really started to set in with Alphabet Squadron, where you have this A-team, this squadron, right, of characters that come together and they become the heroes of the story, right? And it happened in Battlefront also, the first Battlefront novel with Twilight Company or with Inferno Squad or, you know, these other like badass teams that come along, these A teams, and they're pulling off these incredible heroic feats, it kind of takes the spotlight away from the heroes we all grew up and knew and love, or that we know and love. Han, Luke, and Leia, the droids, Chewie, Lando. It kind of takes away from them a little bit. You know, and granted, we want new characters. We do. We want new characters to fall in love with and to follow and to love their stories and their backstories. But that comes at a price. And that price is taking the limelight away from the big three, from our holy Star Wars Trinity. And some people are upset about that. You know, and that's one of the biggest flaws that I've said this new canon has, is that it doesn't center around any like main group. The closest we've ever gotten was Aftermath, that trilogy, because it centered around the same group of people over and over, and you grew by the end of that trilogy to like all those characters. I didn't care for them in the first book. By the time I got to the trilogy, I liked them. There are characters being introduced like Inferno Squad. I want to see more of Inferno Squad. We saw him in the novel and we saw him in Battlefront, and that was it. I would like more Inferno Squad. There were so many other characters, these heroes, like in this one, Black Spire that I'm reading right now. Vi, the spy Vi, right? From Phasma. She's the main character in this book. I want to know more about her. But when you get characters like that, and you get characters like, this is why it's hard for Rey, Finn, and Poe to stand out now. Is because they're in a resistance surrounded by other heroes of the same caliber as themselves. Rey, maybe not so much. There's not really a whole lot of Force users in the resistance right now. But Poe is just like any other pilot. What's the difference between him and Snap Wexley? What's the difference between Poe and Wedge? No, don't get me wrong, Wedge is a great character. But what's the difference between those two? What makes Poe stand out? Because he happens to be wrapped up in the events of the film? What if Poe Dameron was just a character mentioned in a novel somewhere and he wasn't in a movie? Would we even care about him? Maybe some of you guys don't care about him. I don't know. It's Kylo Ren. I know a lot of people really like Kylo Ren as a villain. If he wasn't in a movie, if he was just mentioned in a book somewhere, as he was the villain for one book, would we care as much about him as we do with him being in a movie? You know, so with all these new characters coming out, it's hard. I want to say yes, I would care about them, but that would make things, other characters in the films kind of lose their luster a little bit, and they kind of get lost in the background noise, where you realize they're not the A team anymore. They're one of several A teams. You know, so it kind of takes away that specialness of those characters. If you guys know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comment section below. It's kind of hard to describe. It's kind of taking away what makes them so special to us. You know? So, when you find out there's other characters out there like Hondo Anaka, Smuggler. I actually like Hondo Anaka more than I do Han Solo. And I can't believe I'm saying that. I like Hondo Anaka more than I like Han Solo. I'm probably going to get lynched for that. But I do. And had Hondo never come along, I would have liked Han Solo. You know, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I used to love Boba Fett. Now we've got the Mandalorian coming along. All of a sudden everybody, Boba who? Boba Fett? Who the hell is that? The Mandalorian is going to be the one that takes front and center now. You know, so it makes some of these other characters we've grown up loving kind of lose their glow a little bit. That's just my opinion. That's one of the biggest drawbacks, I think, of this new canon. And we don't have a whole lot of series, like actual standalone book series, in this new canon. Because, in the EU, you had, the New Jedi Order, you had, what was it, the Young Jedi Knights or something along those lines. You had the Thrawn trilogy, you had the Hand of Thrawn duology, you had Champions of the Force. You had all these other, actual series wrapped up and packaged, set within the EU. We don't have that so much in the new canon. The best we have is a trilogy of Aftermath books and a trilogy of Thrawn books so far. That's about it. So that's one of the biggest drawbacks, I think. And like I said earlier, some of the things back and forth that kind of retcon each other. Some little things here and there, but it's nothing really galaxy shattering. Now, galaxy shattering would say, hey, this is how Rey died. Don't freak out. This is how Rey died, and then in a book, this is how Rey died. That's a direct contradiction. And if they're on two separate planets, that's a complete contradiction. That's not going to happen. I think Pablo Hidalgo summed it up perfectly in a tweet one time, and he used the Han Greedo thing, who shot first, as a great example. And he said, somebody asked him what was canon. Did Han shoot first or did Greedo shoot first? And he said, what is canon is that they both walked into that booth and only one of them walked out. Details are fuzzy depending on who you talk to. The canon is that they both walked in and only one of them walked out. So little details here and there. I don't really get my underwear in a bunch over little details anymore, but just the main gist of stuff, right? So I hope that answers your question, Todd. Thank you for sending in the question, man.